Right, so the medium-term budget policy statement shows that government plans to stop the recruitment of new teachers. This statement proposes that the allocated funding in the current financial year will be used to implement 2023 public service wage agreement for capital. This could lead to larger sized classrooms and higher learner-to-teacher ratios. So to take this discussion further, we're going to be joined via video link by the South African Federation of Trade Union spokesperson, Trevor Shagu. Trevor, good afternoon. Thank you for your time with us here at the SABC.
Good afternoon, Liz, and thanks for having us.
Trevor, let's get your reaction to the proposals coming out of the medium-term budget policy statement last week, perhaps looking at the side of education and even the addition of the 24 billion rand to fund the wage increment.
The South African Federation of Trade Unions was not satisfied because what we had put forward in our propositions and proposals was that government must increase the public service compensation bill. And for us, the increase in the public service compensation bill was not only to address the question of wage increments that would have been agreed to in the PSABC, but was also to ensure that you expand the public service wage bill so that you can hire as many public servants as possible. This would have allowed the public service administration to allow departments to hire more public servants, nurses, teachers, police, doctors, and many other professionals which are working in the public service. So we are disappointed with the fact that because they are pronouncing and talking about the so-called debt to GDP ratio that has gone high, they have, as a result, curtailed expenditure on the public service compensation bill. And that is very wrong because, as you would know, that the lower headcount in the public service will lead to overcrowding in many other areas, because the public servant to population ratio is going to widen, and that will mean that the delivery of public services in public institutions will be curtailed and will severely be hampered by such particular strains that will arise out of the increasing population at the time when the headcount is not increasing.
Trevor, thank you for those sentiments. So on the back of that, perhaps we could get into the implications thereof. We're looking at the allocation of the funds used to implement the 2023 public service wage agreement and how this is going to impact your sector, both for learners and teachers. You have alluded to it. But I think also following that, what are the demands then regarding the expansion of the public service compensation, even the hiring of more public services, quality? Really walk us through the reality on the ground.
Sure. So in the public service, the public servants to population ratio will increase across the sector, or rather will stay the same. But we know because the population is growing, so it will not stay the same, but will actually increase. Currently, we have a nurse to patient ratio of 1:224. We have a doctor to patient ratio of 3,198. We have a teacher to learner ratio of 1:31. But we know that this is just an aggregate which is obtained out of dividing the total number of learners enrolled in the basic education with the total number of teachers who are on the payroll. And we know that such particular quantitative deduction is not necessarily representative of the realities in schools, because various other schools have higher learner enrollment and as a result will experience various kinds of overcrowding in the classrooms. But beyond this, you have a police to population ratio of 1:413. You have one social worker is to 5,000 patients if you measure it by the population. This, in our view, is problematic because it means the delivery of public services is going to be severely constrained, because as you would know, as we speak at the current moment, in the classrooms, in the education sector, you have overcrowding that unfortunately is leading to the problems that we have experienced there, the lack of discipline, the lack of time management, because teachers have to deal at the same time with delivering content, but also with dealing with discipline of learners. And in an overcrowded classroom, that is just a nightmare, unmanageable, and it's on the teaching time. If you take that into the health sector, you find there, every time you go into townships and villages, in those clinics, there are always queues of people queuing to be able to be attended by a doctor. In fact, in most instances, these people are returned home to wait for next week when the doctor returns. If the doctor luckily would come twice per week, they would be returned home to wait for the second day. And this is because of the constraints that are caused by the growing population, which is not met by a growing public servants. And to illustrate this even more glaringly, if you look at the population in 1994, the population was sitting at 40 million, but the public servants at the time were just above 1.2 million. Today, we are still standing around 1.3 million, 1,302,000, if not mistaken. This shows that the public servants' headcount has been stagnant and it is not matching the growth of the population. But remember here, if you are going to factor it in the form of a public service compensation bill, you're not only going to be looking at the headcount enrollment, but you're also going to be looking at you're not going to be looking at the population growth rather, but you're also going to be looking and factoring in inflation, because that has to be factored in. And this goes beyond, of course, the enrollment or the hiring rather of public servants, and it goes into infrastructure and the procurement of goods, because you can hire as many public servants as possible as long as there is no infrastructure, as long as the goods that are required to ensure that public services are delivered in those sectors, you are not going to be able to deliver quality services to our people.
You make some valid points, and thank you for that. I'm running out of time. I just want to wrap up the conversation, and thank you for those pertinent points, because I want to look at from where to from here. Given the suggestions, the propositions about job creation, provision for social services, and the dire need for economic growth, what are your next steps as a union?
So, as a union, we have written and will be submitting this. We did submit, though, to the Labour caucus in NEDLAC what we think ought to be done to solve the issue of the sluggish growth in the economy. But we have to send our submissions not only to the Labour caucus, but to the Minister of Finance and the Presidency. We met them. We did make some presentations on these key questions. And we think that to solve the questions of growth in our economy, you've got to pursue fiscal expansion. And history proves us right here that in this country since 1994, every time you have seen fiscal contraction, which is what they are proposing by imposing fiscal austerity, every time there is fiscal austerity, fiscal contraction, you see a corresponding economic decline. So what they are going to do is to trap the economy in a stagnating period, which will just exacerbate the problems of unemployment, which will exacerbate the problems of inflation. Because whenever the economy is not growing, we know that the amount of products which are produced in society are lesser and might not even meet demand. And this becomes a good pretext for the owners of business enterprises to increase prices. And as a result, you're going to have to deal with this problem. So we are saying embark on fiscal expansion. And fiscal expansion in this country has shown throughout the period since 1994. If you look at the period between 2003 and 2008, the public investment measured in the form of general government spending and investment in public corporations grew. And at that time, we also saw a corresponding growth in the economy. The same thing happened just after the global financial crisis of 2008. We saw a little bit of increase between 2010 and 2013, and there was a corresponding growth in the economy. And every time there was fiscal contraction between 1998 and 2003 and between 2014 and now, there's been a sluggish growth in the economy. So their methods are not going to solve economic growth, and therefore are just going to keep us in a downward spiral that increases the government debt as measured to the GDP, that increases unemployment, and that does not resolve the problems that the economy is facing at the current moment.
Well, Trevor, this conversation obviously has many legs in it, and it needs to develop and continue from here into. We'll leave it there for now, though. Thank you for your time, for weighing in on the back of the medium-term budget policy statement, of course, that had been delivered by Finance Minister last week. We're really just getting reaction from the South African Federation of Trade Union spokesperson Trevor Shaku, looking at their reaction, but also some of the propositions from year two and what their next steps are.